Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today, get your calculating shoes on. I don't know if that's an expression, but anyway, it's going to be tough. You're playing white in the first position. This is a very famous game, and you probably saw it somewhere or you saw it annotated because it's a famous example of, well, a missed opportunity. Anyway, you are playing as Mark Taimanov, the great Soviet chess player and pianist. It's white to play. Pause the video. Good luck. See you in a minute. Okay, so in this position, white is in trouble. It seems so. Why? Well, firstly, black is threatening to win your rook. Secondly, black is threatening a simple checkmate. And if you don't do anything, you either lose a rook or you get mated. So let's have a look at some absurd examples. If you, for example, play queen d6, okay, that's a stupid move. Then I just take your rook. Rook takes g3. Okay. If you play rook to g2, for example, trying to save yourself, then again, rook takes rook. Doesn't work. What else can you do that makes no sense? If you try rook to g5, saving your rook so that you only lose a pawn, even though you're already 2 pawns down, then you get mated. It's mate in a couple of moves. It's not easy to calculate everything, but hopefully you saw that it ends in mate at some point. Starts with rook h1, king e2 is the only square. If you go to g2, then you get mated quicker. Queen e1 check, king to d3, queen to c3 check, king to e2, queen to c2 check, king e3 and rook e1. Maybe it wasn't that hard, so maybe you did calculate everything, but I think it was quite obvious that if you play rook g5, you will get destroyed quickly. Okay, what else can you do? I don't know, I found it really hard to find candidate moves because everything I did lost me the game. This is what Taimanov did in the game that lost, which makes sense. And I wanted to show you this blunder last, because that's what was played in the game. He played queen to e3, which doesn't do anything to prevent mate. Unfortunately, it does defend the rook though. So in this position, black has a crushing move, and that's rook to a8. And now the problem is, you either get mated, or you lose your queen, or you still lose your rook, or you get mated on h1, or you get mated on h2, and there's just no way to prevent all the threats. In the game, Taimanov played rook g7, gave up a rook, and resigned the move later. Of course, Geller just played king h6, even though that was unnecessary. This means no checks, and you get mated. If he takes the rook, however, there's absolutely nothing white can do about it. He can play rook g3 check, but king h6, and again, you have no checks. So rook g7 didn't work. After rook a8, nothing works. It seems like you can try rook f2 to try and hold, but simply rook h1 check. And after king e2, rook a2 check. And that's about it. You can try king f3. This leads to a forced mate, but even if you don't see a forced mate, you can still see it loses. Queen h5, king g2 only move, rook h2, king g1, rook a1, king f1, rook f1, excuse me, rook h1, and here you lost the rook and you're going to get mated. You don't even have to take the rook, you can just play queen h2, and after king f3 take this guy, and that's it. So now once the queen blocks, it's over. So what was played in the game, queen e3, also doesn't work. So it seems that the position is hopeless. However, if you'd spent 20 minutes on this position like I did, hopefully you solved it in less, then you found a miraculous save, which starts with this incredible move, rook takes g8. So it seems that rook takes g8, well, doesn't do much. However, now that this rook cannot go the other way around, and now that the rook on g3 is not attacked, and now that rook h1 can be met with rook g1 being a rook up, you've actually dealt with all of black's threats, and there are no more threats. It still leaves you in a hopeless position, 2 pawns down, and much worse, but black has to take the rook, so king takes g8. And now, the hard part, which again hopefully you saw, rook to g3 check, This has to be taken, otherwise white is the one who is going to mate black. So queen takes g3, and now a simple stalemate trick. Queen b8 check, king h7, queen h8. You have to take. If you go king g6, then I win your queen and win the game. And once you take, white has no moves. This could have been an endgame study. I think it's very hard to spot opportunities like this when it's an actual game. But here's a piece of advice. Whenever you're playing a position in which you're worse, the first thing you have to think about when you're trying to swindle is some sort of stalemate. And the good indicator that you have stalemate tricks is when you have no pawn moves, because it's very hard to give up pawns, but it's very easy to give up pieces, especially if you give them up with threats. So again, what did he do? He just took, king takes, sacrificed to rook with a mating threat, and then gave up his queen. And there was nothing that Efim Geller could have done about that. That's it. So yeah, I thought this was a great example of how a hard defense can be found using deduction and knowing that a stalemate can exist in a position. Okay, hopefully you got that one. Taimanov didn't, even though this was move 42. So I don't know if he was in time trouble. I'm not sure about the format of the 51 USSR Championship, but I'm pretty sure it's 40 moves in 2 hours, as it usually was in those days. Okay, let's go a bit further in the past. So Emanuel Lasker, once again, I love his studies, and this one I think is extremely instructive because of, again, a pattern which you don't encounter often in endgames, but it's good to know it because it could happen in your own game. And this is actually a common endgame. It's bishop and 2 against a rook, which means that if black can take both pawns, it's going to be a draw. So the only thing black has to do is give up his rook for a pawn and have his king capture the other pawn. Okay. Before you start on this one, I'm going to tell you that there are several move orders to execute the winning idea. So the exact move order isn't as important, but you need to get the winning idea first before you start analyzing. Okay, pause the video, solve the position, good luck. Okay, let's look at some bad moves first. The first bad move obviously is f6. Why? Because f6 creates, gives black the opportunity to create a light squared blockade. Your bishop is still pinned to your king. As soon as your king moves, the black king is coming into e6, and then there will be no way to make any progress. A general rule in positions like this is to never push the pawns on the same color of your bishop, because then the defender is going to be able to blockade. For example, rook e1, and now if you play e6 check, we know that black has to give up a rook for both pawns, and it's going to be a draw, and that's fairly simple. In this case, even his king is defending, so it's 2 attackers. But if you try, for example, bishop c3 attacking the rook, then rook d1 check, king e4, for example, and king e6, and this is over. This is just a draw, because you have no way to dislodge this king. All black has to do is move the rook back and forth. Eventually, white will have to give up this pawn in order to make any sort of progress. Let me show you that. For example, like this. White has to get his king to one of these 2 squares, pushes the pawn, and now all black has to do is simply get the rook over here, take the pawn, and it's a draw. So, for example, something like this. I don't know. Draw. Okay, so f6 doesn't work, and it's quite clear why it doesn't work. Let's look at another example. If you play king e4, which seemingly makes sense, then unfortunately you messed up and it's going to be a draw. And here's why. Now black can play this very annoying move, rook f1, excuse me. And the point is that if you ever start pushing your pawns now, if you ever push your f-pawn, then it's going to be a blockade, and there's no more way to make progress. Now if you move your king away, for example, I don't know, king d5, I just take your pawn. So if you try, I don't know, bishop to c5 waiting, then I can just go king c6, and there's nothing here. There's nothing in this position. I'm simply too quick because my rook can safely deal with one of the pawns, and you have to move your bishop away. We repeat the position. So, I mean, it's really tough to find bad moves here because the best move makes most sense. However, the winning idea is not easy to see. So hopefully you saw the idea, not just the move. The winning move is pawn to e6. And now, regardless of where black goes, you're going to be doing the same thing. You're going to continue f6. That's the first part of our plan. And here's the winning idea. What we have to do is we have to make room for our bishop to block the pawns, to safeguard the pawns from the rook. So if he goes king e7, then we go f6. So it's the same thing. Let's say he does something more resilient. Let's say king e8. This is, according to the engine, at least the best move. And here's what we do. Pawn to f6. And now he plays rook f1. Again, you don't really want to play f7, because if you play f7, then it's a draw. So now you have to find a way to make progress. This part was easy. Getting to this point, I mean, no problem. However, now it's easy to mess up. For example, f7 is a draw. And how do you make progress if you don't play f7? If you play e7, I play king f7, and again, a draw because I have a blockade. So what can you do? The winning idea is quite remarkable. What you want to do is you want to be safeguarding your pawns from the black rook, making sure that you can play f7 at an opportune moment. So, for example, how would you go about that? How would you make sure your bishop can move? First, you play king e4. And what you want to do now is you want to get your bishop here and then move your king into the position. You need to use your bishop as a shield for both your pawns and your king. Black has nothing better but to wait. He cannot move away from the f-file because then your king is moving in. So he waits, and you start bishop e5. Black waits, bishop f4. Black waits, king f5, making progress. Again, the bishop is pinned, but again, we are going to be able to move it. King e8, king to g5. Okay, rook g1 check, no problem. King h6, rook f1, attacking the pawn, attacking the bishop. Bishop g5, again, creating a square for our king. Rook e1, attacking the pawn, and now this is simple. If you can play f7 without black being able to sacrifice rook, then it's a win. So king g7, for example. If rook takes pawn, then you just queen. If rook doesn't take pawn, then I don't know. If he plays rook f1 now you can just push because he isn't able to take twice. So this idea is extraordinary. I mean, I don't think I've ever played this endgame in a tournament game, but I've analyzed quite a few, and I've never seen this employed, and it makes perfect sense. So let's look at it again. So he's creating squares for his king by shielding the king with the bishop, at the same time making sure the rook cannot sacrifice itself for both pawns. Yeah, I just love this position. Hope you did too. Hope you did manage to solve both. If you have, great job. Extraordinary. Yeah, let me know what you think. Stay tuned for more chess. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.